Hello everybody. So for this video I'm going to be covering the super famous Fairchild compressor. That's going to cover the 660, which is the mono version, and the 670, which is the stereo version. They're basically the same. They're very similar. The stereo one can do a couple different things. It's not just left-right stereo, it's also mid-side. I'm going to be starting off with just kind of a brief history of what this thing is, some of the specs and like the tech behind it, which is kind of unique. One reason why it's hyper expensive, and then just like a little brief tutorial on how to use it and kind of what it's good for. So the Fairchild was invented by this guy Reen Nama. I've covered a lot of other audio equipment on this channel, but the Fairchild's very old. It's from the late 1950s. He worked with Les Paul to create it. So when they made it, basically there was not many other things like it. It was almost used in a kind of broadcast kind of situation before people started realizing, hey, maybe we should use this in audio production, like for music and stuff like that. It's kind of known as the Holy Grail. A big part of that is because it's been used on a lot of really famous records. Another reason is because it's hyper expensive. So modern ones will go for $30,000, $40,000, maybe even more. A big part of that is because it uses 20 tubes with 11 transformers, 2 inductors. It's 65 pounds and a 14 rack space unit. So it's massive. That's why it's hyper expensive. So even though it's very old, it did have a very fast limiting effect within 1/10,000th of a second. So that's part of kind of like its broadcast history. It started off in broadcast history and then slowly transitioned into music. So some of its history, it has been used on like many famous albums, most notably like at Abbey Road. So a lot of things at Abbey Road, and then obviously like Beatles, a lot of Beatles drum tracks, and they use it kind of on everything like pianos, vocals, and then just a bunch of other people like Pete Townsend, Adele, Amy Winehouse. Engineers for all these people have used the Fairchild sound. So it's something that's been around for a very long time. So now I'm going to go into a few different parts of the compressor. I'm going to use the 660, which is the mono version, kind of to show what this thing can do. The 670 is almost the same, but we'll get into the one unique thing about it kind of toward the end of the video. So with a lot of these plugins that emulate kind of classic analog hardware, it is really important that the signal going into it and the signal coming out is kind of what the plugin's expecting. So, a lot of people, you wouldn't put a very hot signal into an analog gear that's just totally blasting it out, because then your sound's going to sound really bad, right? But then again, a lot of people who use plugins, the signals going into them are way too hot. And a lot of times what every plugin wants is different. So it's always good to use the input gain monitoring on each software plugin, because that'll show you this is what this plugin is expecting as an input signal, and then also kind of what it thinks is a good output signal. So a lot of times in your DAW, like Logic or Ableton or Pro Tools, you're going to be using the dB/fs, but a lot of these classic analog things are using dB. So usually for dB, you want to shoot around 0. And if anything sounds too quiet to you, then turn it up later in your chain with like a gain plugin or something. Don't try to turn it up in the plugin. That's why a lot of people's signals will sound bad. So basically preserve your signal, use the tools that this plugin gives you, set the good level in, set the good level out, and the plugin will show you how to do that. So as you can see here on this meter here, you have it set to in. So the VU meter there, you'll see it's very low. So you can turn the input gain up. And that'll help you get your needle to kind of kiss that 0 there. So that means that, okay, you have a pretty good signal for this plugin. That's what this plugin wants. And that's basically a good working input signal. So once you have a good input signal, you can switch here to the gain reduction part. And now you're actually looking at the actual compression and what the compression's doing. So you can be able to set your threshold just like any compressor. So the higher you turn that up, that means the more compression you're going to do. Your ceiling's coming down, it's touching your audio more, and it's going to compress it. So you see on the left there that the gain reduction knob is way lower. And that basically means, okay, you're really working on a lot of your audio here, and you're really compressing it. And then the far right there, which is kind of unique to the Fairchild, you have this thing called the time constant. It's basically kind of like the nature of the compression. So you can see as you switch through different time constants, the needle is reacting very differently. Usually it's about the release time, but it's kind of like it's like a dynamic kind of interaction between the attack, the release. It's gonna react differently depending on what you're putting this thing on. So is it on drums? Is it on bass? Is it on vocals? That needle's gonna dance differently. You can look at the needle if you want, but really when you're setting this, you should be kind of listening to how is the compression being applied How is it making your audio sound different? Is it smoothing things out? Is it making things more dynamic? Maybe sometimes you want something smooth. You want to not have so many peaks and valleys. Sometimes it's something dynamic, like a drum bus or something. Then you probably want more punch. You want more dynamics in that needle. So the last part there is the output. So you can switch your meter selector there, and you can see this is what the plugin is outputting and what it thinks is a good output signal. So you can turn that output knob there, and that'll control the signal coming out. So you want that to try to kiss the 0. That's what this plugin says is a good output signal for it. That might sound really quiet to you in your DAW when you're like producing. You could maybe process something with this, and you'll be like, damn, that needle's on 0 and it sounds so low. I want to turn it up. Well, don't turn it up in the plugin because you're going to distort it. If you really need to turn up the volume or make it fit with your mix, do that later on with like a clean trim or a clean gain plugin. Something that won't distort anything and lift that level up so you can mix it, but don't try to lift up the level in the plugin. That's what this plugin says is good. So one funny thing from the old school is like, say you have a signal coming into it. You shouldn't have to ever do this. But if you do have a signal coming in and the signal's too low, and you turn the input gain all the way up, and it still doesn't have a good working volume, you can turn that little headroom screw, and that'll make the headroom of the machine higher, which basically means like, okay, you can take in different levels of signal. You're basically changing the machine to be like, okay, be more sensitive, I guess you could say. Ideally, you wouldn't have to do that. Ideally, the signal coming into the machine should be loud enough, or you should turn up the signal before in a clean way. But it's part of the analog emulation, so you can do that in the machine if you want. Maybe it sounds different. I don't really know. I don't use it very much, but you do have the option of kind of making this more sensitive if you want to try to get your level up to a working level. It does change the dynamics a little bit. So looking at the bottom there, they have the sidechain filter. So looking at the bottom here, there's the sidechain filter. That basically says, okay, you're going to cut out the bass. That way the compressor isn't working on the bass so much. So when sound passes through this compressor, it's operating off of energy, electricity, right? So if you put something in there and it has a lot of bass, that's going to totally command and take control of this compressor. So if you're doing, say, on like a light piano or like high vocals or something higher up, sometimes it's good to cut that bass out. That way you get the dynamic action on the treble sounds, because that's a treble sound. Obviously, if you have like a kick drum or maybe like a low bass, you want to keep that down because you want to actually compress the bass. But if you're working on something that's higher up, cut it out before it goes into this machine with the sidechain filter. That way you're getting dynamic action on the stuff, on the content you like, and not on the bass undertones or some sort of room noise or something. So the last thing here is there is a mix knob that basically blends it in, right? So if it's 100%, that means all your audio going through this is going to be completely affected. 50%, that means like about half your signal is going to be compressed, half of it's going to come through cleanly. This is good for like parallel buses and stuff like that. Like maybe you want to have a really strong compression, but not as much of it. That's a different character than having 100% and limiting it a little bit. That's a lot different than like saying, hey, 20% of my signal, I'm going to crush and then let the rest of it be natural. That's good for drums and stuff. So here we see the 670. This is the Fairchild, the stereo version. As you can see, if you change things around, a lot of times the plugins will have everything linked. But if you want, you can unlink them. And that means you're processing the audio differently. So the left speaker and the right speaker will have different types of compression, which is pretty weird. Usually you're not really going to do that. There's not really a lot of good reasons why you do that. Maybe in a mastering situation, if you are getting a track that's already been mixed, maybe the balance is a little off. If you're a master, maybe you can kind of balance the left and right signal or try to achieve something with that. But in general, you're going to be using the unlinked version of the 670. You're going to be using that more for the mid-side mode, which I'm going to go into is basically like the one unique thing about the 670 versus the 660 is it can process mid-side. So here I'm going to run through like a little quick example here. So you can see on the right of the 670, there's that little knob there that says it switches between left, right, and lat vert. So if you switch that, the lat vert is red. You can see the top one there is for the lat and the bottom one's for the vert. So instead of messing with the left channel and the right channel and affecting those differently and compressing those differently, now you're going to be compressing the side signal and the mid signal. And this is pretty good if you want to try to add some dynamics maybe to the side to try to beef it up a bit. Maybe you have some sort of reverb or something that you want to have some motion to, maybe bring it up, maybe bring it down. The vert will be in the mids. So that's going to be everything up in the core of your signal, your bass drum, your kick, your vocals. Maybe you want to have those more compressed and then let the sides breathe more, maybe not process the sides as much, and keep the middle strong and clean with the sides kind of more wavy. It's really up to you. A lot of times you use this in mastering, but you could use it on the mix bus as well. Just be careful when you're doing it because you can kind of throw your whole song out of whack. So just make sure you really know the stereo image you're working with, like what is in the middle, what is in the side, what that even means, and then know what you're doing. And then this thing can actually allow you to kind of change the dynamics of your whole song, your whole picture. And it's pretty strong for that. So that's basically it. Definitely try them out. I'm sure there's a lot of different emulations of kind of like the Fairchild sound. It's a very heavy kind of warm tube sound. It really brings out, it has a unique kind of character. It's good on modern stuff. It's good on old stuff. Definitely check it out, try it out. Remember that the plugins, especially the better ones, they really do try to model the analog stuff. So just be very careful with how you process your signals going through it. Make sure you know what you're listening to, how it affects the dynamics. Try it on drums, it's really good. Vocals, it can be really good. I like it personally on drums. You can kind of bring out like a cool punchy character, especially if you have a little bus for it. So just put your drums to that bus and then really squash it with the Fairchild. It has a kind of a cool sound. Yeah, so definitely check it out.